movie, so some of us enjoy a dessert usually prior to our discussion, sometimes during. So I just wondered if anybody had brought a dessert to share or talk to us about. I know who has, so I'm gonna say, I mean, I know one person who has, so anybody else bring a dessert? Okay. Yes, Carola, you're muted.
Well, I'm eating a little rum pot, which is fruit in rum. And I need to finish this up because it's from last year, and I just started a new one with strawberries in rum.
Wow, so do you mean it's been sitting in some kind of vessel for a year?
Yes, in a quart jar, and in a gallon jar.
Wow. Well, I think we need the recipe to that, don't you?
You start
Share.
you start with strawberries, and then you add, there's other fruit you can add later, and then you can start eating it or drinking it, whichever you prefer, around Christmas.
Oh, wow. So could I have done that with the 12 pounds of strawberries we picked out at the Wolford strawberry farm? So fresh
Yeah.
strawberries? Oh,
That's
darn.
what I did. I got strawberries, and I did other things, but I have about, I don't know, a pound or so in the jars.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, you've got the dessert thing figured out, obviously. Well, we know that Jack Altman made some desserts because he delivered them. They just got back from a short trip, and they delivered them to Kathleen and I. And then I, in turn, delivered the ice cream to our guest tonight. I'll let her weigh in. Oh, there it is. There's Nilou up in the corner. Gave her she said it reminded her, it took her back to home, Jack.
Wow.
So would you tell us what you made?
Yeah, I made a few attempts at some Iranian food. I've never made it, so I can't tell. She's the only one who can tell us if I came anywhere close to anything, because I don't know how they're supposed to taste. But I made 4 things. I made, and only she can tell me how to pronounce this, gorabaya. Is that the correct name for the cookie?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and that happens to be my favorite one. And it's got almonds in it. It's got pistachio, of course, and it's really pretty unbelievably delicious. I made some halva, which I grew up with also because I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and everybody, I think, in the Middle East claims halva, and it's basically tahini and honey, and this one's made with pistachio. So
sesame seed,
exactly. So we grew up with it as candy, and I like it very much. But you have to kind of like the sesame seed, and which I do. I also made something I'd never heard of, which is called a Persian love cake. And that's got all the typical ingredients, rose and pistachio. And this one has lemon zest in it, and it's a pretty moist, very nice cake. And I decorated the top with more pistachios and rose petals. And then I made the one that is not my favorite, but I'm really glad I got it right, which is the ice cream. And I'll explain why. It's basically, it's a no churn. So you take vanilla ice cream and flavor it, but it's vanilla ice cream with rose water, pistachio, and saffron. And to my taste, I think I used too much rose water, but I think to some people, there is no such thing as too much rose water.
Nilou is shaking her head like, bring on the rose water.
Okay, so I got it right. That's great. So those are the things.
You have pictures of any of this, by the way? It sounds fantastic.
Okay, the cake looks like that. I don't have the whole cake.
Yeah,
halva is kind of a sticky little piece like candy, and then these are the gorabaya, the cookies. So
Jack, you've got recipes that we can send out in the next couple days to everybody?
Because I got the recipes off the internet, so I can copy them and send it
Great.
whatever you guys want to you. So
Great.
I do
Or
that
just
as soon
send
as we're finished.
That's great.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else have a dessert that you're munching on currently or? Okay, well, thank you for that. And thanks again, Jack, for sharing. Well, I'm just tickled to death to introduce our guest tonight. She is, well, not only has a wealth of knowledge about the topic, but she's also my immediate backdoor neighbor. So we literally had our little prep meetings, our Zoom prep meeting across the fence this morning at 10 a.m. until the bugs got so bad we went inside and I said, oh, let's just wing it. So Nilou Vakil is, I don't know, how long have you lived here, Nilou? I mean, you've been our neighbor.
Yeah, it's been since 2013, end of 2012.
Wow, so almost,
yeah.
wow, time flies, almost 10 years. And her friend Joe, or her husband Joe is with us. I cannot see him, he's hiding strategically, but he is with us tonight, so welcome, Joe. But Nilou is a professor of architecture up at KU, but she grew up, was it literally in Tehran or?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it was in the city where this film was shot. And then you came to the US in 1999. Can you take it from there and just talk about, because I know you sort of went back and forth a little bit. Can you just tell us about
Sure.
just coming over and then where your career took off from there?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed the choice of the movie, and I went back and Kathy shared a few of the previous events with me, and I really enjoyed looking through them. So those recordings are actually being used. So I'm glad you recorded them.
Good.
So this is it's a wonderful activity that the library is organizing with all of you, and I'm glad to be part of it. So yeah, I mean, my journey starts like any Iranian immigrant, a Persian immigrant. It's sort of the oppression of the regime and the government that doesn't allow you for growth, and you leave the country, and that ends up becoming a brain drain for the country, which my generation almost, I think there is a survey out there that 60% of my generation who are educated, college educated, have left the country. So, which is a problem for a country that needs leadership and youth. And I mean, I'm not young anymore, but needed us 20 years ago. So.
You're young to us, Nilou.
So yeah, I moved here by myself. Well, I'll go back to that. My mom also studied here before the 1979 revolution. So we lived in Dallas, Texas, or Arlington, Texas, from 1978 to 1980. And right after the revolution, my mom sort of decided that she wants to go back and join her family because there was just such a turmoil inside the country, and she wanted to be with her sisters and her mom and her dad and the rest of the family and friends. So my mom and I went back to Iran, to Tehran, which is her hometown. Also, my mom is also a resident of Lawrence, so she goes back and forth quite a bit. She just left last week, actually 5 days ago, to go back to Tehran. And then by myself, I moved here in 1999, and this is after a series of events which sort of they stopped me from my full scholarship to study my master's degree in the university there. And they questioned my my hijab, and they questioned why I plucked my eyebrows and why do I wear makeup, and that was the reason for them not allowing me to continue my education. So at that point, I decided that, you know what, this is it for me. I just can't take this anymore. So I decided to leave for United States at that point. And my dad, who passed away last year, he had applied for my citizenship or for my green card before I was 21. So I was part of the chain immigration that was so frowned upon in the previous years. So going to Dallas again and moving to LA, moving to Denver. I made Denver my home. This is where I met my husband, Joe, who's here on this call. And we both studied architecture. We started a firm together, and we lived in Denver for a long time before moving to United Arab Emirates, and where Joe had a temporary had a visiting professorship. He had a visiting professorship at the American University of Sharjah, which is right outside of Dubai. And we lived there for a couple of years, and it was strange for me to go back to the Middle East after having lived in United States for a while, and seeing the isolation. Even though United Arab Emirates is just an hour flight between Tehran and Dubai, an hour and 15 minutes, closer from here to St. Louis, by the way, as far as the length of the flight. So, or Chicago, actually. So the isolation continued, even though we were neighbors. The country of United Arab Emirates didn't know anything about us, which is strange. And that isolation kind of opened my eyes that, wow, it's really global. It's not just West and East, it's Iran versus the rest of the world. And after the Iranian Revolution, that isolation has continued for a long time. So, and now we're back here in Lawrence, Kansas. We love living here. We love being Kathy's neighbor. And we have made this place our home. And activities like this makes me very happy that people in this town are just so curious. And that's just one of the important things that keeps us here. And our kids love it here too. So I'll just finish up the little summary of the bio and let Kathy go with the rest of the question and the movie and anything else that I can contribute to.
Of course. And I'm so glad you did that, because even though we've been neighbors for 9 years, I am so excited about tonight, because we've really never, or I have never had a chance to learn this backstory of yours. You're just kind of not kind of Nilou and Joe, but you're Nilou and Joe with the two adorable boys in the back with the trampoline and the patio party. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about this. So when did you first become aware of the filmmaker Jafar Panahi? When did he first sort of enter your consciousness, and to where you were going, oh wow, this guy is
right,
a rebel?
He wasn't a rebel when we knew him. So he was an apprentice to another very famous Iranian director, Abbas Kiarostami. I don't know if anybody has seen any of his films, but he passed away a couple of years ago. And Mr. Kiarostami, he was a very, very famous, very avant-garde filmmaker. And he was one of the first ones who, after the revolution, began looking at filmmaking as a tool, not to criticize the government, but to draw attention to cultural events and cultural discomforts of his contemporaries. So, and he opened up the world really to what is happening in Iran. The revolutionary, the government, the Islamic Revolution, has a very strict sort of stepping or hurdle for any kind of an art exhibition, and movies actually go to that categories too. So from submitting a script when it's just a thought, to submitting the screenplay, to there are different steps and who is going to be cast in this, in the movie or in the film, and how many women, how many men, what are the relationships, every scene that they're in together. So it's a very, very rigid process. And there are almost 8 or 9 steps throughout a process of movie making. So there's a lot of self-censorship. And I think Jafar Panahi's movies are incredible in that regards, because the self-censorship becomes a strength of the movie. And I think him and Abbas Kiarostami, which Jafar Panahi was a protege of, they were really good at that. So they would bring attention to the cultural issues with this notion of self-censorship, and which they could actually globally also exhibit their movies and win tons of awards. And that's really what happened. So we were aware of him growing up in Tehran, and especially, I went to a university that was an art-based university, art and cinema-based university. So it was always, you hear about these people who are just making progress in an environment that art and creativity is not appreciated. So that's, in the beginning of my school years, really, I knew about him. And I want to say 1996, 1997, that's when I actually knew about him quite well.
So in the scene, and I kind of wanted to do this chronologically, but I'm going to throw that out the window. But in the scene where he's riding along with his niece, his 11-year-old niece, and she rattles off the rules for this film project that she had, a distributable film, which I thought was hilarious, that she had to get done in a month. And she rattled off these rules about what the film had to be and couldn't be. That was a reflection of what the government imposed on filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes sense, but I thought, wow, okay, so that's just, so they're teaching that at that level in school then.
Yeah, they're teaching that at elementary school. That it's called ideology. There's a topic of study even at elementary level that's called ideology. So when you study ideology every year, you know what is acceptable and what's unacceptable, not necessarily culturally, because Persians actually take pride in having this open, creative, very, a culture that is always about, celebrating art and celebrating creativity. But it's about the Islamic culture that was forced upon Persians, and there's always this sort of resistance to accepting that Islamic culture. That's why you see people like Kiarostami and Jafar Panahi and many other directors and movie makers and artists and designers in the country that are pushing the boundaries, because they're not accepting what is forced upon them. That is not part of their heritage, but it's sort of forced upon them as this sort of rigid Islamic views of the world. I'll probably get banned from entering Iran after this.
We sort of talked about travel over the fence today. I do want to touch on that, but I'm curious, do the same restrictions apply to people in like graphic design, like you started out, or architecture or visual arts isn't that almost more difficult to impose?
Well, I think that the idea of self-censorship is embedded into our soul. This is part of our DNA now. After 40-something years of the Islamic Revolution, we know what we can and we can't do, and within the boundaries of the administration, the Iranian administration, or the cultural administration. So yes, it's everywhere. So when you look at art, and let's talk about paintings. Islamic painting is all about celebrating geometry and math, but Persian art and Persian paintings are celebration of human beings. So after and it's about the dance and the music in a space. So you have music, you have dance, which is a form of art. You have architecture, and you have sort of the celebration, which is a big part of the Persian culture. That never changed after in 1400 years, 1500 years ago, after the Islamic invasion of the Persian Empire. So that that never changed. Persians still kept pushing all of that. So you see that very vividly between when you compare the two, the Islamic architecture versus the Persian architecture, or Islamic art versus the Persian art, or even music. So they're very, very much similar, but the base of celebrations are very different. They're actually in a contrast with each other. So when people say, "Oh, this is Islamic art," to me, I'm like, it doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, what do you mean? Like, what is Islamic art can be from China all the way to Morocco. I mean, we're talking about 3 continents right there. So, I mean, which one are you, what are you talking about? Like what part of it, what country you're talking about? Because that heritage is also part of it. The culture of the country is part of it too.
Right, but you're also using the term Persian.
Mm-hmm.
And Persia, well, I mean, old Persia obviously was enormous. I mean, it covered,
Right.
you know, just probably, I don't know, 10 times what Iran is today.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why do you I'm sorry, basic idiot's question, but why do you use the term Persia?
So the region that this movie is from the Persian region of Iran. Iran has a lot of diversity in the country of Iran. So you have, you know, the Turks from the north and Azeris from the west, and so there was a lot of different, and Arabs from the south. You know, there is the diversity of the country of Iran is a lot is celebrated, and it's obvious, and we know about it. But the embedded culture, is a Persian culture. It has nothing to do with what heritage you're coming from, or what that diversity. It
with
unifies
modern boundaries.
So so it unifies the country as a Persian culture, because the celebrations are cultural; they're not religious.
Right.
The majority of, and I'm talking about people and citizens. I'm not talking about what the government tells you to celebrate. I'm talking about what people celebrate in their homes. So, which sometimes it's in contrast, and sometimes it's in harmony with what happens outside of your home. So that's sort of a little summary. I mean, there's a history to that, but also the term Middle Eastern, I learned that for the first time when I moved to the US. I'm like, Middle Eastern, what is that? I'm in the continent of Asia. So I consider myself Asian. And I said, oh, I'm from Asia. And people were like, you don't look Asian. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm from the continent of Asia. So it was very confusing. It took me a while to call myself Middle Eastern and use the terminology that the political boundaries are forcing on us. But again, I'm not. We've had these conversations in our Iranian and Persian communities that, what are we? Like, are we Middle Eastern or are we not? So are we Asian or are we not? So it's the same thing as African American. People from Egypt are from Africa. Right. And they can call them.
Thank you for explaining that.
But they're brown, they're not black. So, I mean, that's also a very confusing terminology. And we kind of laugh at these political terminologies that really we don't even relate to.
Yeah. Well, I want to sort of break down the movie. And again, I want to remind everybody, if you have a question for Nilou as we go along, first of all, let me just take a poll. Show me fingers, 5 stars, 1 star. What is your review of this film this month? 5 stars being the best. 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 5, 5, 3, 4, 3. Okay, good. Well, so everyone in general liked it. So again, just put your question in the chat, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end to kind of open it up. But I kind of want to go, this was so fascinating to me. And this guy, he is just, in my opinion, the best. I mean, he was just, he was doing a lot in this movie, and he made it look so effortless and subtle. And I mean, because he was directing and he was turning that camera, you could kind of hear the camera when he wanted to shoot it was amazing. It was like a one-man band to me. But in the first scene, he starts out, it's kind of a rideshare situation.
Mhm.
And so the man gets in first, I believe, and then a woman comes in, sits in the back,
Mhm.
and they start talking about this theft of which kind of establishes a theme for future scenes in the movie about the death penalty, and and stole 4 wheels from his car, and then he kind of revisits that theme. Did that seem real to you? Because obviously, I mean, I think they called it a docu fiction.
Mhm.
Obviously it was a movie, they were scripted, but it seemed like very real to me. How about
No,
you?
it definitely was a real. I mean, the ride sharing before Uber was a thing, so it
Yeah.
is a thing. So it's yeah, you get into a taxi with 4 other people, and the conversations are fascinating. You know, you don't know these people, and you get into these deep political or cultural or ethical conversations, and then you leave. So there's nothing attached to you. You're not running into these people in the middle of 20 million people tomorrow. So I mean, it's very kind of a safe way to voice your opinion, say what you want to say, and disappear. So that's very, very real. And this sort of conversation about the ethics of, you know, whether you sort of so the ethics of killing, you know, that becomes part of you're right, that becomes a very important part of the movie that comes back again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, very much an absence of small talk between
Oh, yeah,
in just
yeah.
about every scene between
Right.
the driver or the director and the people. And
Right.
then the bootlegger comes into and I wondered, how common was that? It just made me wonder about your life and as a teenager or whatever. And were movies available to you? Did you have to get a Hollywood blockbuster from a bootlegger?
Yeah. So and before probably you guys saw it in movie theaters, we would have it in our VHS and even Betamax at that time. Yeah, we had deliveries of all illegal and black market movies and songs. I mean, I remember listening to Michael Jackson and Madonna on little cassettes that the bootlegger delivered to our house, and we had this code that we had to talk. Like he would ring the doorbell, and we would not open the door until we had the secret code that we talked. We knew that this is the guy, and sometimes they would bust the guy and arrest the guy, so that would happen too. But it's still, I mean, with streaming services and really sophisticated hacking systems that Iranians and Persians know, it changed a little bit. But yeah, I mean, this is how we watched movies. We had 2 channels growing up. Both there still are government channels, and we had, I think, 1 or 2 movies a week, depending on on the week. It was always up to the week. And later on, during the Islamic government, they opened up for TV series, which were all funded by the government. They were interesting. They were sort of historic figures and very safe. We watched a lot of sort of Japanese cartoons at that time, all about animals. So it was very, very limited. But our really excitement of our lives were the bootlegger coming and us having movie nights. I mean,
So I'm just curious because I love detail, but so the bootlegger comes to your front door, and the code, what is the code? Like a knock, like a too long?
No, so they ring. So everybody lives in. You hardly have houses there. Everybody lives in condos. So they ring your doorbell, and you're like, "Who is it?" And it was before we had cameras. I mean, like similar to Ring that we have. They had it 20 years ago there, but you would sort of ring the doorbell, and you're like, "Who is it?" And it's like, Mr. I don't know, Jim. Okay, Jim. So what's up, Jim? And the Jim would say, oh, Kathy sent you a message. We're like, okay, so this is the guy. So like, there was like this secret code that people had amongst, and they had a list. They would write down every person had a different code, and
So how did Jim get your name? How did Jim know that you wanted
references really high?
Okay, references. Wow. Okay, wow. Well, I need to move on because God knows I could talk about this for so much longer, but I want to go to the accident scene. And so the bootlegger I think he's still in the cab, and the driver stops because there's been an accident, and the man of the couple, you were assuming that they're married, not quite sure, I don't think. It looks kind of like he's dying, but and he wants the camera and he wants to record his last will in order to leave his partner or his wife the house, and he makes sure to say twice, I want my brothers to leave her alone. That really struck me. And then after it turns out he's okay, she calls the driver back twice and said, I want that tape. Anything could happen, but don't tell my husband. So let's talk about, what was that about? Property rights for women? I mean, would that will have worked just in real life? Do you know? I mean, that's
I don't
illegal.
think I think there are laws, and I'm not very familiar with those, but I know that if you're married and a husband passes away and you don't have children, as a woman, and you don't have children, you have no rights to the property of your husband.
Gosh.
So that's why when people get married, in order to protect the women, so the dowry is always 50% of the house. That sometimes there's that written in your dowry, which is a legal documentation and it's not a will, but it's your dowry. So if you get a divorce, if somebody passes away as a woman, as a wife, as a widower, you have that to claim. So you're not, and typically, I mean, and that demographic that we saw in the film, typically women are not working, they're taking care of children, so they have no income of their own, and they're always reliant on their husbands or to provide for them. So they're basically kicked out of the house and become homeless. It becomes a pretty substantial issue, human rights issues. So that's that's a problem. So I'm not sure if that will would have worked. The little film or the little record me as I'm talking, as I'm dying, but it would actually be something that the wife would have as a wish of the husband. So that would have been respected culturally, but not legally.
Right. Wow. So in the scene where the older women get in with the fishbowl, the fish and the fishbowl, and as I understood it, they needed to get to this spring, which was a bit of a shrine, because they were born I was so confused. They were born 5 years apart, and they had to put the old fish back in and get new fish or something by this deadline of noon. And then he gets visibly sort of irritated with their silly superstitions, and says get out of the car, but then he flags down another cab and they go on their way. What was that? I mean, is that just was that something you recognized as was it religiously based, or was it just a couple of crazy old women with crazy superstitions?
I think those superstitions do exist in, amongst people. So I wasn't familiar with that specific one, but I'm familiar with the type of those superstitions. I mean, I kind of follow some of that crazy stuff myself, which is, for me, is a game, it's a play on something that makes me happy. But I don't change my life for it. I mean, I don't
Right,
I don't make my kids like do crazy stuff for it, but yeah, it was familiar, but not the specific one. I wasn't sure, but the element of water and the element of fish that exists culturally. So we do celebrate that, or we do consider that as an important part of the culture. The element of water, especially, that's a big deal. Or
Yeah.
life in water. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondered about that. And again, put your questions in the chat. I do see them. I'm going to work them in when it kind of makes sense. But I wondered about the actors,
Mhm.
and we talked a little bit this morning about this. Here he's been banned since what? He went to prison for 6 years. I don't know if he served out his term, but he went in, I think, in 2010.
Mhm.
But the ban was for 20 years, which obviously he's made like 3 movies, possibly 4 during this time.
Mhm.
And I asked you, has he been punished? What has he, why hasn't he been locked up again? And I want you to tell people what you said, but also what happens to these actors who sort of go along with him at great risk, I would think, to themselves.
So let's unpack the jail issue. I think at this point, Jafar Panahi has brought enough attention, global attention, to himself that anything that happens to him becomes a human rights issue again. And Iran doesn't want to be seen as the human right violator. They are, but they don't want to be seen as that. So I think the issue becomes, he has done several movies right afterwards. He's actually in a home, I don't know what, so he's homebound, like he is not allowed to leave the house, leave his home. And there's no like ankle bracelet there. So it's, people monitor you, there are people who are actually sitting outside of your house that probably can see if you're out or not. But even inside of his house, he starts to make movies. And Taxi was made when he was waiting for a sentence or waiting for a call from a judge, or so he had a little bit of a period of time to be able to be outside for decisions to be made about his future. So he's taking that on as an opportunity. The way the movie is, or the film is working, it looks very much, yes, it seems to be a film, but I really think these are just people. These are not really actors. These are just people who are like, hey, come and sit in my car. I'm going to film you. Are you okay with that? Oh, yes. And then leave. So there are no, the American system is different. You have to give permission for anything. For your face or for your movie or for your video to be participating in any kind of a movie or exhibition. But there's no, none of that is true. So I think it's a docu-series. It's not a series, but it's a docu-fiction. You're right. That's how it's. So it's actually, these are not really real professional actors. They're just there to provide that little snippet that he uses.
It was hard to tell. It was really hard to tell.
Sometimes they were not actors.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get to questions now. I had 50 questions, but that's not fair to everybody else. So Des wants to know, when strangers talk to each other in a cab about politics, is it even safe to be against the regime?
Oh yeah, everybody is.
Everybody is.
A lot of people.
So it would be weird if you weren't.
No, there are instances that you are sitting in a cab with, or you are participating in an event with people who are not politically seeing eye to eye with you, but people speak loudly about their thoughts. It's the action that is the issue. If you act on it, that becomes an issue. But talking about it without the action happens a lot. Everybody does. So that's not strange at all. I think there's another question before that.
Well, that was more of a general question I was saving, but
okay.
Ellen says, I was concerned for his niece. I was too, Ellen. Was it safe for him to involve her? And you said she accepted his an award for one of his movie in Cannes.
Yeah, I think she's out. She's no longer in Iran. So I don't know if it was immediately after that or before that, or, I mean, I'm not sure how that worked out, but yeah, I mean, but she's also a child, so I'm not sure how that affects her, but I know that she no longer lives in Iran.
Yeah, I was struck by when the neighbor sort of meets them, and it has the iPad with this video of a theft assault, and he takes the girl over for a frappuccino, and she comes back. He says no cameras. I'm afraid he might want to kidnap me, and then she just dashes across the street and goes and gets her frappuccino.
Yeah.
Okay, Sharon wants to know, this was the first question. With 40 years of ideological inculcation of youth, can you guess how deep Persian culture tradition will remain?
Ooh. Oh, it's still strong, I want to say, because it's sort of embedded in families. You know, families are the keeper of the culture. And that's a great question. I don't know, but I feel like any family that I'm related to or know or friends with, there has not been a fear of that. I think the fear of becoming an immigrant like myself and losing that for your children, that's more of an issue, but that's an issue of immigration. That's not necessarily about the Persian culture. So that's a great question. I don't know.
Well, and another thing we talked about, just speaking of fear, is traveling. And, you know, your mom left a few days ago. We had hoped everybody to get her, and she actually wanted to be on, but I didn't promote it at all because it was, I have my actual Tehran time clock. Oh, it's what is it? It's 3:24:50, I guess. So it's 4 o'clock in the morning, basically there. And plus there are internet issues. So she was willing, but not able to join us,
Right.
unfortunately. But we talked about, I asked you if you were afraid for her when she goes back and forth, as she does often. And you said no. And then, but you said, I don't think we should let Joe go. Joe is with us, but he's Nilou's husband. And tell us about that.
Well, I think just Joe is American, so I think he would be going as either a tourist or as an academic, which it's not recommended for him to go. I don't know, Joe, if you want to unmute and say anything, but it's not recommended for him. I've gone back and forth several times. And again, architecture is non-controversial, so it's not, I'm not dealing with any political issues or not, I'm not even writing necessarily about Iranian politics or Iranian buildings, but my mom is a retired teacher, so I feel like she's pretty retired art teacher, so I feel like her in her world. Hopefully she's safe, but you never know. But she's gone back and forth. She's seen as a grandmother. She's seen as, you know, as a person who's just going back and forth to see her grandchildren. So there are a lot more important people to go after, I guess, than my mom and I. But Joe, we don't want him to go, even though he had an opportunity to go as an academic trip for a conference that. He was invited by actually the government of Iran to go, but we did not feel comfortable about that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the roses lady, the lawyer at the very end of the film that gets in the cab with a dozen roses. And I wasn't quite sure about this. They clearly had a past, and I don't know if it was because he met her in prison or maybe she defended him, or I'm not quite sure what that relationship was. Do you know?
Yeah. So she is a very, very famous human rights lawyer in Iran. Her name is Nasrin Sotoudeh. She's currently in jail. So she after the 2009 uprising that was pretty much against the previous president of Iran, she became an advocate, an activist, and she became sort of a main lawyer for people who were just thrown in jail in Tehran, and she would defend them and she would try to get them out. And so she had this sort of line to, this route to the jail, which is in northwest of Tehran, pretty down. That was her regular path every day. So she defended a lot of people, and again, she's a human rights lawyer, and they know each other from the world of being in jail and being human rights advocates. I think that's really what it is. I think I am under assumption that they had met before when you see that the film, but I'm not sure. And I kind of question, this can't be an accident, like that he runs into her, and amongst 20 million people. I mean, that's just impossible. So I think that was definitely part of bringing attention to the human rights issue and saying that, hey, be careful what you're doing, make sure that film that you're making, what's going on with that. And, her path, and she's going to that prison, like that she was on her way to that prison. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, don't use anything I say. You don't want to include my sordid realism. Which I thought was an interesting term. I saw a little bit of spark between them, but she said she was married, but I until she said that, I thought, oh, there's something.
Yeah, her husband is trying to really get her out. I mean, she caught COVID last year. They allowed her out for 1 week, and she has a heart condition now. So she was moved from a prison in Tehran to another city, and so there's hard to access her. So that's another problem that they have. There's a lot of call for her to be released because she's in jail because of the human rights, because of her being a human rights lawyer. So she's clearly an activist, very well known. Anytime we read about Iran's human rights, her name pops up as one of the main advocates and lawyers.
Scott is curious if you read a new book called A Beginner's Guide to America for Immigrant and the Curious by Roya Hakakian. Seems like a great view of what it's like to come from Iran to America. Have you read it?
I have not. Maybe I can write it. Just kidding.
You might be able to. Well, let's have everybody unmute in case you just want to discuss. I don't want to, I feel like this is, we don't have that many people here. You can certainly weigh in on what you thought. If you have any questions for Nilou. Sharon referred to, these sort of recurring subjects in the movie. And, we had women, we had censorship, we had, a lot of, so anything you want to talk about, Maureen?
There was an NPR thing about a Victoria and Albert exhibit called Epic Iran. And during the interview or the discussion about the art film, someone had said how surprised she was that she went to Iran and even the cab drivers would suddenly just start speaking poetry. And they said it's very ordinary that's how people are. And I wondered if you'd comment on that.
Sure. First of all, I've heard that the pistachio, saffron, and rosewater ice cream goes really well with White Castle burgers. So
that's good. That's good, Nilou.
Burgers. I do not.
It was delicious. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah. But yes, it sure is. My generation grew up on reading poetry on a day-to-day basis. Our all our literature books are poetry books.
Mm.
as you grow up. So it's all about, you learn how to speak the language at school with poetry.
Oh.
So, I mean, they had us memorize, I don't know, lines after lines after lines of the famous poets like Rumi and Hafez. And Rumi is the most famous in the West, but we have,
Yes.
more admired poets out there. But yeah, so that's how we grew up. I took a look at some of the current books. My mom works with our boys to teach them Persian, and the books have changed. So I think maybe it goes back to this sort of the question that Shireen had about the culture, the depth of the culture. And they're being gradually pulled out of the books. So that's what kind of united a lot of people, because that's sort of the language of poetry. And that just, I'm kind of connecting some of these dots now. But the current books are gradually taking some of those, the depth of, my mom studied the same poet and poetry as I did in school. So we studied the same thing. But now it's been taken out of the books. But yeah, that's, Maureen, you're right. I mean, it's part of the culture. It's part of how people talk to each other. You constantly are referring to so and so said, and then you recite somebody's poetry. It's very common.
Anybody else have Sharon?
It's very similar to the older education that we had when we had to recite Shakespeare in school and we had to memorize poetry. I also want to talk about the Mideast. I think that it's a regional, I had friends from Isfahan as well as Tehran who had to emigrate because they were Jews, and it very much, there are generalities, not just halva, but Middle Eastern. It isn't just Asian. It isn't, Asia is huge, but there is Middle Eastern culture when it comes to food that seems so familiar, when it seems to have commonalities of familiar relationships. I kept thinking about charuts. I mean, that idea all through the Mideast of, if you'll forgive me to use that term, all through the Mideast is always shared taxis because it's a cheaper way of doing it and people get dropped off. So there were just so many things that seemed so familiar, as well as the wonderful richness of the Persian Empire, which my friends were able to talk about and to live, and unfortunately had to leave. It is tragic. By the way, sordid realism was not a flirtatious term. That was one of the things that the niece was talking about rules for filmmaking, no sordid realism. So
yeah, I did, just for the record, I didn't think they were flirting in that way. It was before, I thought, just the way they looked.
Yeah, no, there was
a little,
they got each other. They got each other. They
sure.
work, they're in the same milieu.
Yeah,
clearly. It was a wonderful film. He's charming and charismatic in and of himself. But I also want to emphasize it really was very much, if not scripted down to the line. It wasn't just that he picked people up off the street and said, come on, be in my film. These were people he knew and had asked, I believe, from what I could read, specific parts with specific ideological viewpoints. The women are not just two crazy old ladies. They are two women whom he knew and were asked to play the part to show what a hold in culture, as in all cultures, traditional cultures, superstition has, and how they could therefore be open to a regime that can hook them with this kind of superstition. And his niece was so clearly wanting to be in Hollywood, or let's really say good. Just the way her gestures were of a mature woman and the way mature women talk, for sure. And it is no surprise. I'm glad she got out because she's got such charisma. It was a fabulous film.
Who else? I just heard a male voice here. Someone want to weigh in? No? Anybody else have questions for Nilou? about anything, really.
Are there more movies by Iranian directors
Mhm.
that are available at the library?
Can we
That might
check
be a
that,
Kathy
Kathy?
or a Kathleen question.
Yeah, we
Oh.
can sure check that out and maybe send a list. Canopy has a great assortment of different documentaries and films. So let me do a little research because I'm not real
Okay.
sure. But I think actually Canopy is probably the best possibility for for films like this.
I had a trivia question, Nilou. So with the bootlegger, I'm back on the funny bootlegger. He sold, I think, he sold a handful of DVDs. Well, the first time for 45 Thomas.
Mhm.
Thomas.
Tuman, yeah.
What would the value of that be? Toman.
Well,
That's right.
I think by 45, it's 45,000 Tumans. So
Mhm.
they're the zeros are going out of control because of the sanctions and the economy, and sort of the currency has no value, so they keep adding zeros in front of them.
What would be the dollar equivalent though? Like just today?
45, it's maybe a couple of dollars.
45 Toman would be a couple of dollars
45,000.
US.
Yeah, so they don't say 45,000, they just say 45. Yeah, 45 Tumans. I think at right now is around a couple of dollars, but I think he might be renting them. I think that's the rental price. So the bootleggers rent you the
pirated?
movies; they don't sell you the movies.
These are pirated versions, are they not?
All
yeah.
of them are. All of them
Yeah,
are.
my sister-in-law lived in Saudi Arabia for years, and it was the same thing. Liquor was drunk. Women wore incredibly fashionable clothing in their homes, and they all saw the DVDs.
Mhm.
I love that you had a bootlegger, Nilou. I'll never look at you the same again.
Oh, yeah. Bootlegger for
With the code, I mean,
for
like,
movies. We had one for alcohol too.
That's right.
Oh, well,
Alcohol, movies, and fashionable clothes with
I
big
wasn't
time
that
labels.
fashionable. I always wore jeans.
Oh, well, it's the Dottie Saudis, she called them.
I was in Iran in the 1970s.
I wasn't born there, but my mom tells me it was great. So
It was.
Mhm.
Oh, gorgeous.
It was they had the Key Club. People would go dancing in the discotheque. You could wear basically, you didn't have to wear a scarf or anything. It was, for women. Women were much freer, so to speak. Not free like American women, but it was freer.
I think actually women in Iran started voting before American women.
Really?
Mhm.
Everybody started voting.
Interesting.
I want to know before we're running over, but I want to know when you said in the very beginning, when you were introducing yourself, you said they had problems with your eyebrows and maybe your makeup and your hijab.
Mhm.
What was wrong with your hijab? Was it that you wore one, right?
Well, I didn't wear the full-on, chador, which is the head to toe, the black cloth.
Chador.
So you wore the scarf like the
I wore the
attorney did,
scarf, like a modern scarf, which, like colorful modern scarf, which you see a lot of women wear. And it's, what you wear is a reflection of your beliefs. In that culture. So you can kind of, exactly who's religious, who's not, who has gone to the West, who has not, who is trying really hard, who is not. So, it's really, everybody knows, you just walk in the streets and you know exactly the demographic, which is stereotyping, but it is really, that's the reflection of where they're coming from. Very clear reflection of where they're coming from. And there's a big diversity of it, so it's not all the same.
So interesting.
Mhm.
If anyone else has a question, we will take it now. Otherwise, we will just thank you with our applause, Nilou.
Well, thank you.
For helping us.
Thank you, Kathy. as well.
I'm
Thank
just so
you for the
glad-
invitation. I really appreciate it. This was really fun, and what a great way to end a Wednesday night.
Absolutely.
much.
Well, I will thank you over the fence a million times for this. It's so great just to get this sort of perspective from someone who's actually lived it, and I can't thank you enough. So,
Of course, please reach out
Thank
to
you,
me if you
Nilou.
guys have any questions about this or read any books about it. I think it will be kind of fun to do that exchange too.
okay. And Kathleen and I will kind of research that,
Yeah.
the movies, because the director himself has a few more that, I mean, maybe we have access to those. Who knows?
Wow.
I
Yeah.
didn't
That'd
look,
be
but
nice.
anyway.
Sounds like a good job for a librarian.
Mhm.
I'll find one.
Go find one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nilu.
Thank you,
Yes,
everybody.
thank you.
Nilou.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
rest of your
Kathy.
week. Stay cool.